Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've posted over 100 excerpts from some of my more than 250 American montage shows that I did in the 1980s and 90s while at UPI Radio. Recently, I embarked on a fresh series of shows, and here's the second half of one of my new American Montage interviews. My guest this time around on American Montage is broadcaster and TV show collector Scott CRAMER. He joins us by remote from upstate New York.
Dennis, you mentioned Dragnet, and of course that was a long-running radio series that also transitioned to television. But a third Jack Webb series, Adam 12, was also groundbreaking for its time with Kent McCord and Martin Milner.
I think Martin Milner and Kent McCord must have been real favorites of Jack Webb because he used them whenever he could, even before they had their own series.
Yes, and of course Martin Milner got his start in Route 66, which, of course, for trivia fans out there, the question may be on Jeopardy one day, is that who wrote the song
to Route 66? You asking me?
No, I'm asking anybody, but if you want to answer it, go ahead.
Well, I think somewhere in the answer there's a marriage in here somewhere.
That's right, and his marriage was to Julie London, who was also married to
Jack Webb. And, of course, at one time she was married to, as you said, the guy who wrote Get Your Kicks on Route 66, and that was Bobby Troup, but she wasn't married to both of them at the same time.
Not at the same time, of course.
But Julie London becomes the common thread that connects Bobby Troup, who starred as one of the doctors in Emergency, and Jack Webb. And also, Troup, of course, was a jazz musician and composer, and Jack Webb had a great love of jazz. As a matter of fact, on radio and TV, he did a show called Pete Kelly's Blues. So he liked jazz, and he liked Julie London.
Yeah, he did indulge in jazz. I think he did like that from time to time. You take Adam 12, you take Emergency, you take Dragnet. That, oh my, that's television. That's what it's all about. And you don't find series like that anymore. I mean, people like their CSI. I just can't understand it. I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the days gone by back in the 40s, the late 40s and the early 50s, and then, where they used live television and everything was done by the actors, and how it's changed so dramatically in the last 50, 60 years, because especially in the movie genre, they use what's known as computer-generated images, CGI, and I just, I'm gonna, alienate people, but it turns my stomach when I see anything with CGI, because it's not. Where's the acting? It's not acting anymore, is it?
Oh, not at all. And of course, anything is possible with computer-generated images. Somebody said to me the other day, imagine what the Ten Commandments would look like if they redid the parting of the waters. Well, the parting of the waters in the silent Ten Commandments in the 20s was pretty damn good. So the bottom line is not the CGI, as they call it, it's the acting.
Yeah, and that's, the thing about remakes, because remakes of television shows into movies may work in some cases, but not all the time.
Scott, before going on the air, we were trying to figure out which shows we should talk about to talk about how much television has changed. You mentioned several times a show that I think is probably, from what I have read about your interest, your second favorite show, and that's Gunsmoke. And as you mentioned, we did lose James Arness some time ago, and what a treasure this man was.
Yeah, he was such a treasure, and he supported so many causes, he and his wife, Janet. And, when he was asked to do something, he did it. He was a funny man on the set, and also, he worked with John Wayne many occasions.
And didn't he like ice cream a lot?
Yes, I remember a blooper where he was, they were showing him when he was out of character and eating ice cream, riding a horse.
He also held the distinction, if I'm not mistaken, unless it was Clint Walker, of being the tallest star in a major series.
Right. I think he was like 6'7" or something like that. He had almost ducked when he walked into the Long Branch Saloon. There was a real, like I said, with Gunsmoke, a real magical aura, I guess, between the characters, and especially, Matt and Kitty. They had a relationship, but they didn't really come out and say it was a love thing. But you knew it was there. Festus and Doc Adams, old Doc Adams, Scudder. Yeah, and the magic continued, didn't it? It's just amazing how many shows. There are shows that clicked, and there are shows that didn't click. Long-running, one of your favorites, Herbert McGee and Molly. They tried it on television. It was a flop. So
with different actors. That was a stupid thing. And, but still, I see what you mean. Just because a show works on radio doesn't mean it's going to work on TV. But Gunsmoke was nearly seamless, even though they changed the cast.
After about 15 years of Gunsmoke, they were going to cancel it. And, there was an outcry from the fans, and also a man by the name of William S. Paley, who ran CBS with an iron fist. And his wife said, "You can't cancel that show." And so the show was never canceled, and it ran another 5 years.
Am I correct in saying that Miss Kitty was with the series all but the final year?
Yes, Miss Kitty started, she just didn't want to do the last year, and then she was developing throat cancer, and that's what she passed away from.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. Gunsmoke had been a highly successful radio show, different cast. The great William Conrad played Matt Dillon, but they figured at 300 pounds he wouldn't look right on a horse. So instead of embarrassing him, they fired the entire cast, which surprised a huge number of people. If I may for a second note that Chester was Parley Bear, who was in about 8,000 old-time radio shows, who went on to be Mayor Stoner on Mayberry, Floyd the Barber on Mayberry, Howard McNear was Doc on radio, and a woman named Georgia Ellis, who more or less retired after Gunsmoke, was Miss Kitty. So they come on with this new show, mostly, I think, by popular demand, because Gunsmoke on radio had captured everyone's imagination.
Right. There was always a mix between the characters, and sometimes it wasn't pleasant, but for the most part it was, and that's what kept people's attention. People wanted to tune in every week to see what was going to happen between Festus and Doc Adams, or Chester and Matt Dillon, and whether Matt Dillon was finally going to, get his, which he did in the first episode, by the way. Matt was shot several times, but he ended up living, and the series went on for 20 years.
I remember there were a couple of episodes where Miss Kitty was just sobbing, just crying her eyes out, because she thought Matt was dead.
Oh, I remember when Doc Adams had been shot, and he was looked like there was the end for him, and Festus came to him and said, "Don't you die on me, you old Scudder." He says, "We got a lot of fishing to do yet."
Well, the writers of that show really captured the essence, because if you think about it, they were living in a pretty isolated part of America. The Santa Fe, or as Chester would say, the Santa Fe, came through Dodge, but it was almost like living on Hawaii. I mean, these characters were stuck with each other, so they better get along.
Or on Gilligan's Island. How's that?
Oh, yeah.
The guy by the name of John Mantley, who wrote and directed a lot of these shows, even from the early days. A lot of people don't know that Gunsmoke began as a half-an-hour show, and when they syndicated it, they entitled it Marshall Dillon.
Now, didn't they do that so in the ratings you could differentiate between the two shows or something?
They did that, yeah. They did that a lot of times, just like, for example, it comes back to me, Hawaii Five-0, they ran it late night. And they renamed it McGarrett. So people, it would pique their interest. Oh, a new show, McGarrett? But it was Hawaii Five-0 in all actuality.
I know you've seen the last episode of Gunsmoke. I mean, you love that show so much, I'm sure you've seen it. Did they say goodbye, or did they, as I had heard, thought they were going to be back the next season?
Well, they thought there was going to be a 21st season. But, no, so there was no goodbyes. But it did follow up with 6 movies afterwards, all starring James Arness. The last, I believe, was in 98 or something like that. And Miss Kitty was the only star, besides Newley, Buck Taylor, to appear in the first movie. Ken Curtis had declined, saying that they didn't pay him enough money.
Always money disputes. Well, that last Gunsmoke movie how many years after the show went off was that made? Matt must have had white whiskers by then.
That's right. Well, he had a daughter, and it was, he was really white-haired, but he still had it. Still rode a horse, and it was just very interesting to see. We
were talking about the star of MacGyver being injured and how Lorne Greene worked in pain a lot. Wasn't James Arness injured in World War II?
Yeah, he had a real bad leg wound. And, you talk about Chester limping and making that up, but it was a real limp for James Arness. And sometimes it really bothered him on the set, but he pulled through and did what he had to do on the show.
Scott Cramer, how would you put Gunsmoke in perspective as far as its importance in the history of television?
I think it was groundbreaking. I think you had a lot of shows in the 50s and in the 60s that set precedents. But Gunsmoke it was a family drama. It was an hour that people tuned in on Saturday nights just to watch, to see what was going to happen, and it gripped the attention of the nation. And no other program really did that until Dallas.
All right, let's talk about Dallas. It is coming back, I understand. Amid all of this, it was announced that Larry Hagman has some type of cancer. How do you put Dallas in perspective in the history of television?
Dallas did what Gunsmoke did. It was a groundbreaking series. Of course, at the time, in 1981, you had the big phenomenon of Who Shot J.R., and it went around and around and around and kept American guessing. And until that time, you had some Super Bowls that were big ratings winners, but when the revelation was made of Who Shot J.R., that became the top of the ratings, the most watched show in television history. Dallas lasted approximately 14 years and also had a couple of movies, and the popularity really never died. They had reunions, and it was talked about bringing it back, and it's going to air again, and this time it'll be on Turner Network Television, believe it or not. It won't be on a regular network, but some of the cast members agreed to come back.
You talk about how television can capture people's imagination. A little tough for it to happen now because we have, as you say, these 500 choices. But back when there were only a few networks, I remember the David Janssen series, The Fugitive. And at the last episode, I remember I was listening to a St. Louis Cardinal baseball game, and the announcer at the time was Harry Carey. He was watching The Fugitive in the booth, telling people during the baseball game what was happening on television.
Yeah, it's, The Fugitive was very popular as well, and left it kind of as a cliffhanger, but they never did any more with that. We were talking about remakes, and I just wanted to touch on that. Now, when you have a series like Dallas, they're just going to continue with another generation, which is fine. But when you make a remake of The Honeymooners, and you have another person playing the character of Ralph Cramden, it's not funny. At least I didn't think it was funny, and I choose not to go see remakes. However, I did watch the remake of the Beverly Hillbillies with Jim Varney, and they had Dolly Parton in it, and there was also a guest spot. It was kind of funny. Somebody had disappeared. There was going to be a wedding, and I think the bride had disappeared, and so they went to this detective agency, and it happened to be Barnaby Jones.
Oh, no.
So Buddy Epson had made a guest appearance in that film, and so that was funny. That was a funny remake. And, they made, reunion movies are okay with Gilligan's Island, but when you try to make it with a whole different cast, like the Wild Wild West, it just doesn't work. The chemistry's not there. You didn't have the chemistry between Jim West and Artemis Gordon on the Wild Wild West, which was, again, another very innovative and popular show.
But it's interesting, in the case of the new Hawaii Five-0, the younger generation that never saw the old show has no problem with it. I think it's because when I think, for example, of Dragnet, I don't think of the show, I think of Jack Webb. Jack Webb owned Joe Friday. Jack Webb was Joe Friday. And so, as far as I'm concerned, nobody else should even attempt to be Joe Friday.
Or McGarrett. Jack
Absolutely,
Lord.
Yes.
You had Jack Lord, and how his hair stayed in place. How many cans of hairspray did they go through?
Boy, I don't know. Speaking of Hawaii, you mentioned Magnum P.I. The actor who played Magnum's assistant, John Hillerman, remember him?
John Hillerman, yep, Higgins.
He was, my God, Magnum. He was always saying that. There was a story that he used to like the soft drink Fresca, which wasn't sold in Hawaii, and he had crates of it shipped over.
Had it imported.
Yeah, had it imported. Of course, you wonder how many free tickets they got on United Airlines showing that plane every week.
That's right.
Let's talk more about Dallas. What was the magic of Dallas? I mean, in some ways, was it the first primetime soap opera in a way?
Well, it was. I mean, you had the early days. You had Peyton Place, and it was the first nighttime soap opera to really take hold. Followed by Knots Landing, which was a spinoff, then Dynasty, and then Dynasty had its spinoff, The Carringtons, and Falcon Crest with Jane Wyman and Cesar Romero. But Dallas was the first true, it was the family. Again, you had a family that always didn't see eye to eye. There were feuds. It was about oil. It was about greed. You had a mixture of things, and it kept people's attention. The reality series of today, I mean, it's pretty hard to keep somebody's attention with Dancing with the Stars or A Minute to Win It, or so. That's what I want to do, is sit there for 5 minutes and watch somebody try to throw a ping pong ball into a glass.
Well, and the other thing, too, that a lot of people don't realize is if you really look closely at those reality shows, they're scripted. For example, there's that awful show on the alleged History Channel, Ice Road Truckers, which they now call simply IRT since they're not up in Alaska all the time. How come the camera is always there when the truck crashes? I mean, think about that. There's something rotten in that show that gives away the fact. And you look at Pawn Stars. Of course, the number of hours of preparation that had to go into that show to make it look live. Now, I'm not cutting it down. They're halfway decent shows, but still, when you say reality television, that doesn't even ring true anymore.
No. You had reality television back when you asked for it, or Ripley's Believe It or Not. That was reality television.
So was Truth or Consequences.
Truth or Consequences.
Yeah.
That was things that really happened, and wasn't scripted.
Of course, my hero was Ralph Edwards, and I really think that This Is Your Life is the grandfather of all the things you ever saw on Oprah or any of those shows.
talk shows galore, over like 20, 25 today. Jerry Springer to Steve Wilkos, and the list goes on and on.
Scott, you were talking that at one time there were nearly 24 Westerns on TV. Remember when we went through the medical show era?
Oh, yeah. Medical Center.
Oh, Lord.
And, Marcus Welby, M.D.
Before that, there was Ben Casey and Dr. Kildare, and they were everywhere. And then we went through the one with the cop shows. There was a revival in that for a while.
It seems to be that every 10 to 15 years, television repeats itself, and you'll get a blast of comedy shows or reality shows or cop shows, and that's the way it's been for many, many years.
Well, they used to say back when men wore neckties, just save your necktie, because in 7 or 8 years that style will come back again.
That's right.
Scott, in our closing few minutes, let me get into the consumer aspect of television. I have always thought that there are a lot of things you can't change about the networks. It's money, 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 and they're pretty much going to do what they want. But you mentioned that Gunsmoke got saved from oblivion because of viewers. Do you agree with me that far too many people just roll over and play dead and don't even think to write a letter or complain?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just, people don't think anything's going to happen. It's not going to do. My voice doesn't count. It's like riding the train. I was on there for 2.5 days, and I found a couple of things that I disagreed with. They said, write a complaint. And I says, it won't do any good. She says, well, customer service really listens to the people. And I just thought to myself, well, I haven't seen that recently in many occasions. I'll tell you one example, and people listening to this would agree with me. TV Land, they're doing so much more reality programming today, or making series like Hot in Cleveland with Betty White, and it's original programming instead of reality, but nonetheless, it takes away from what they originally were created for, and that's to play old-time TV shows. They do it during the day, but instead they spend their money, instead of buying old shows, but putting new shows on the air.
Yeah, and as I had said, my favorite channel used to be the History Channel, which early on they called the Hitler Channel because it was mostly about World War II. And now it's difficult in prime time to find anything relating to history. I know they have a second channel. Someone was telling me that some of the pure history shows, though, are off on a second History Channel.
Yes, it's called H2, and the second History Channel, and that's where most of the modern Marvels and Wild West Tech and other programs have ended up.
You look at what they're named, such as the History Channel, and they don't live up to it. But how glorious it was when those cable channels started, when you could watch old-time television on the channel that was supposed to be doing it.
Right. Look at Nick at Night. Nick at Night had all old-time television shows, all, and now they just show new ones. Roseanne, Friends. I don't know what they're really broadcasting, but it's not the fare that they had before, and it's not fair at all to the viewer who enjoyed it at one time.
Are there any over-the-air, use your antenna stations out there doing any kind of old-time television?
We have the network called This, and there are a couple. And there's Retro Television that is just playing old TV shows. They've got the libraries from CBS and NBC, and they are out there. The old programs, people will be happy to know, are still being broadcast today. And you talk, and again, we go back to DVD. Dick Van Dyke, Johnny Carson, and the old game shows that appear on DVD. So they will live forever. The question is, will there ever be a generation again that will really appreciate them?
Scott, one final question. What if you're listening to this in a rural area and there's no big city mega record store where you can go in? I mean, they're out here on the West Coast, and maybe if you've ever been to L.A. or San Francisco, you know about a company called Amoeba. which is just as if you died and went to heaven as far as the old shows go. But what can a person listening to this who is pretty well in a rural area do, I guess using the internet, to find these collections?
Well, you have certain sites, Hulu, for example, Hulu, and you can watch old-time television there. There are sites out there, just put in the web browser and just say old-time television, and it'll come up, and you can watch it, just like with the old-time radio shows that you can listen to. There's a plethora.
What about going to Amazon to buy them? Is Amazon a good place?
Yes, you can go to Amazon. I've bought several DVDs of old-time television shows from Amazon, and they're fairly priced, and sometimes you'll even get free shipping. I've never really had a problem with Amazon.
Scott, old-time radio and television, I think, are a pretty important part of our history, and thanks to people like you, we're writing about it and preserving it, and thanks for taking the time to talk.
Well, thank you very much, and you take care.
I hope you enjoyed this interview from my new American Montage series. Check out YouTube for more. I'm Dennis Daly.